Welcome to our virtual outing for the month of September. My name's Rich Turner. I'm on the board. I've been on the board. This is my 6th year, and I'll term out the end of this year. I've been coming to the canyon since 1955, when my parents first took a vacation out west. And that initial viewing of Grand Canyon caused me to leave Chicago at the earliest opportunity and move west. So I always wanted to live where there were contour lines. Anyway, tonight's presentation by Tom Sulpizio is on the technicians who were on the 2 flights that collided over the canyon in '56, a TWA and United flight. And it's about some of the people on board that flight, one of whom was his own father. So he will be presenting this tonight. And let me go to the next slide. Let me quickly cover the mission of Grand Canyon Historical Society. You can read it, but we celebrate and promote the study and preservation of the Grand Canyon region's cultural and natural history for the education and enjoyment of its members and public. And we do that in various ways. You can become a member. It's just $35 a year, and that gets you several things. By the way, this is a great link. You can copy and paste it to our website and the membership link. I'll give you a moment if you want to copy that. And for your $35, you get 4 copies of the Old Pioneer, our quarterly magazine, which also includes the bulletin. The Old Pioneer is filled with historical writing, different vignettes of history dealing with the canyon and people of the canyon, and even the natural history. And the bulletin is our communication on what's going on with the organization when we have meetings, virtual outings, our picnic, and so forth. So that's the nuts and bolts part of the Old Pioneer, the bulletin. Also, our virtual outings we try to do them once a month. We also have actual outings. We had one a couple of months ago to one of the old train stops, one of the old villages, Apex, along the Grand Canyon Railroad, when the railroad was built to haul lumber and ore out of the canyon area. And one of the things that's not listed here that we do is our history symposiums, which we do. We are now on a 3-year schedule. Our last symposium was a year ago next month. They've been held historically at the canyon and well worth attending. We also have oral histories. We have people doing oral histories, and they can be found posted on our website. Again, there's a link to just the oral history section. And you can see Tom here interviewing Wayne Raney's dad, who worked at the LA airport when the crash occurred in 1956. If you have any suggestions for a presentation you'd like to see, or an actual outing, a real outing instead of a virtual one, please contact us. We're always willing to look at new places, new things to talk about. Anyway, our next virtual outing is with Mike Nelson, who is with us this evening, talking about his book about the Midair collision called We're Going In. He also made a presentation at the last symposium, and believe me, it's a good one to view. It's next October, next month, Tuesday the 15th. So put that on your calendar. You'll want to hear it. And to get to tonight's presentation, which I'll turn over to Tom in just a minute, this is his bio, which I will read to you. It says, it's kind of, hang on just a second. Part of it was covered up by the people. Tom Sulpizio is the son of one of the 15 technologists on Flight 718. And so his family has been part of Grand Canyon history indelibly since 1956, but his first visit wasn't until 1987. He became associated with Grand Canyon Historical Society in June of 2014, following the dedication of the National Historical Landmark for the 56 crash site. He was elected to the board of GCHS in January 2023 and as vice president in 2024. He's also a founding member and officer of the patrons of the 56 Grand Canyon Midair Collision, formed in 1916, and that's an affiliate of Grand Canyon Historical Society. And Mike Nelson, who's going to present next month, is also a member of that, founding member of the patrons of the Midair Collision. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Tom so he can start his presentation. Tom,
Rich, one small little correction. We were formed in 2016. You said 1916, and being that we're a historical society, it could have been 1916, but properly it was
the past.
It was definitely in the past. So now it's time for me to share my screen. So again, I want to welcome everyone and thank you for attending. I gave a shorter version of this talk in at the symposium last November, and it was really compressed. It compressed to the point where I was rushing through some of the charts. So this is a little more casual, leisurely presentation. And I've added considerable new content. Number one, I've added the aviators and the crew members of the United flight. They are very interesting as well, although they were not technicians or technologists. They weren't technologists per se, they were technicians in their profession of flying the aircraft. So the subtitle is Some of the Nation's Leading Technologists and Aviators Perished on Chouar Butte on June 30, 1956. And what you have is the wallpaper in the back there, and you'll see it again many times, is the actual crash site with a small, with a person with a yellow vest on showing you the scale of the crash site. So some basics about this event, and it was a major historical event at Grand Canyon National Park. First of all, there was two major state-of-the-art piston engine or propeller-driven aircraft, a DC-7 and a L-1049 Super Constellation. There were all 128 passengers and crew lost. Both of these were major carriers with highly experienced pilots. I've used just as a graphic to Mike. Thanks to Mike for the cover of his book, which is a wonderful cover, and it fits in perfectly with this chart. So I've, again, paying homage to Mike and his book here in the next bullet point. You'll hear more about that, of course, in the coming month. But also I wanted to highlight a person who's a member of the Grand Canyon Historical Society and has an outstanding historical website. He's an FAA official and an aviation archaeologist by the name of Mike McComb. And he was a speaker at our conference, our symposium last year. He was at our picnic in July, and he'll be a speaker in the future, probably early next year. But he's done a tremendous amount of expedition and archaeological work at the two crash sites for the two aircraft. Here's his website. Also, there is a very important National Historic Landmark that was dedicated in 2014. By the way, it's one of the largest among the National Historic Landmarks. It's 1,332 acres. The United crash site and debris field, which you saw on one of that original wallpaper chart, is 128.5 acres. And so Mike McComb's expeditions to the sites, both TWA and United, are curtailed. These sites are off limits. There's a special permission and permits are needed to visit the sites. They are no longer open to the skilled expeditionists who have been there before. So the location is about 10 or 11 miles. It's 10 and 11 miles upstream from the Desert View Watchtower. If you've been to the South Rim, to the eastern side of the South Rim, the Desert View is a characteristic. It's a Mary Coulter masterpiece that she built in the 30s or 40s, and I think a little bit earlier than that, maybe the 20s or 30s. So the TWA crash site is north slope of a ravine on the northeast corner of Temple Butte. It's about 10 miles from Desert View. The United crash site is an upper south side promontory of Chouar Butte. It's at 4,050 feet. The TWA crash site is closer to river level, but the United crash site, because it was a head-on crash, is at 4,050 feet, and it's above the confluence of the Little Colorado River and the Great River, the Colorado River. So this presentation is about the 15 technologists and the 3 aviator crewmen on board the United flight. That flight was from LA to Chicago Midway to Detroit and to Philadelphia. Sorry, the bottom line got cut off there, trying to squeeze too much into one chart. We just do this. Okay. So the question is, why so many technologists on a LA to Chicago flight? 15 of the 53 passengers were technologists. And I've come up with this from my research. I've come up with these reasons with the background map being that of Southern California, Metro Los Angeles. The defense and aerospace industry was concentrated in Southern California following World War II, especially in the 50s and 60s during the height of the Cold War. But the company headquarters and centers of higher education were still mostly in the eastern third of the country, from Chicago through the East Coast. Because you had this bifurcation of the industry, headquarters and the engineers and education being on the east, but the manufacturing centers and the emerging newer technologies on the West Coast, especially in Southern California, there was a demand for transcontinental flights, same day, 1 day transcontinental flights. And why did the Grand Canyon come into the picture? Well, because I would say most, if not all, eastbound flights from LA to Chicago or to the East Coast, the flight paths crossed over northern Arizona with views of the Grand Canyon, So there was a lot of companies listed here in the background. I've listed a few more on the side. Many of these companies had representatives among the 15. Now some geography, a little bit about the crash site. I wanted to give you a tour of the crash site without us actually being able to go there. Or one thing we'd love to have is drone footage of these crash sites, but we don't have that. And drones are also prohibited in the national park. So it would take a huge number of permits to get drones to take some photos. But I've put a series of 3 photos and line them up here. You have a classic U.S. Geological Survey map of the canyon, of Grand Canyon. Wayne Ranney likes to show a USGS map, which I think he calls it the snake or something, because if you look at it, it looks like an animal of some sort. Looks like
It's
a
called
critter.
the dragon map.
The dragon map. That's it. Thanks, Rich. This is a piece of that, and it just shows with the 2 red circles where the 2 crashes were. So that shows you the United crash was on a promontory. The TWA crash was kind of on a plain going down towards the river's edge. And this shows it on a Google rendition from Google Earth. This is basically based on 3D of satellite views. And then this is a classic photo from the 1956 Life magazine, which shows the way it appeared The two crash sites appeared in 56. These give you the macro image. You don't get the zero in on the United crash site. So in preparation for the National Historic Landmark, the Park Service, specifically Ian Huff and researchers and a series of researchers from Northern Arizona University, Ben Carver and others, conducted many archaeological surveys of the site in November of 2008. What's amazing is to see that even some 52 years later, you have this debris field still showing up from the metal slag, from the melted metal slag of the United crash. So you can see the scale of this area. You have some equipment and some materials here in the upper left side, and you have one of the archaeologists with a yellow vest on just above the letters landmark. One thing I want to focus in on is this turret, this rock turret or pinnacle that you see off on the right. That is the marker. When you see that rocky turret, you then know you're at the crash site. And it's characteristic to see this on almost all these photos that are medium to close up. So this photo, I just find this photo is striking because it also, of course, in the shadows beyond the cliff, it's dark. And that's the way the photo came out when you had the shadows of the rocks block out any other view. So let's now do a little bit more of a progression. This shows from the Colorado River. This is an older photo that shows the elevations. So you got the slope 1,600 feet, and then you've got the vertical distance 1,000 feet. Again, these are National Park Service photos, mostly from Ian Huff, from a presentation he gave in 2014. He's assembled a lot of these photos. What's characteristic about the confluence of the Little Colorado River and the Colorado River is this shoal. I call it a sandbar. I don't know if it's a sandbar. Rich, you would know better. You're a river person, but it's a
sand and gravel.
It's a sand and gravel. It's a shoal, no question about it. So the Little Colorado River just below the photo, and the main river is running right to left. And this is a very characteristic, this promontory is very characteristic, and it's circled in yellow. Again, this is looking from the crash site down to the Little Colorado River, which is running kind of up to the left, the main river, the Colorado River is left to right, and the Little Colorado River is this tributary off to the top here. What's interesting is we then zero in on this crash site. These are taken very, very soon after the crash. These were taken in 1956. You see this photo taken a little bit of a distance by the Park Service with the characteristic rocky turret or rocky pinnacle. And then we zero in on it, come in close, look at all the debris that's still there. This is basically in July of 56. There's your, again, the pinnacle. So there's I don't have the feet, the dimensions here, but these are literally, we're measuring tens of feet at this point. Now I have some photos taken. This is an aerial photo that the Civil Aeronautics accident investigators took in October of 56, this left photo. And then here's a photo taken on the ground in 75 at one of the many cleanups. Look at the debris that was still there in 1975. Isn't it? It's absolutely amazing. Again, we see our familiar pinnacle. That pinnacle is always there. It's even partially visible on the left-hand side photo, which is taken from an aerial shot. Now we're going to do another Char-Butte United crash site progression. So we're going to go from 32,000 feet. I took this photo 2 weeks ago on a commercial flight from New York to Los Angeles. So here's Cape Solitude in the foreground. which is at about 6,100 feet. The crash site is at 4,000 feet. And this next photo was taken by one of our members, Kern Nuttall, who's written books about the cemeteries of the Grand Canyon. And basically, he took that from the perspective of Cape Solitude looking down. You're looking down about 2,000 feet. And you're looking at, in this box, is the crash site. And then I've expanded that with a previously taken photo from the 2008 expedition with the archaeologist in yellow on the bottom. There's our pinnacle. So this shows the progression, 32,000 feet and probably about 7 miles from the crash site at this point, vertical and horizontal distance with that hypotenuse of the triangle, probably about 7-8 miles to about 2 miles. Cape Solitude to the crash site is probably 2 miles tops to being on the ground or physically taken from the ground. So this, I believe, shows you the best progression of the crash sites from 2 weeks ago to 5 years ago to roughly 15 years ago. The beauty of geology is the geological features never change. They change only if there's weathering, and that takes place over hundreds of years, or if man comes in and does some excavation or something like that. So I have some photos here from Mike McComb's expeditions. And again, going back to from the river's edge. Now here he's looking up at the crash site circled in red with our pinnacle showing up. And then he looks at these chimneys or crevices, which are below the crash site. Then you had the talus slope. So if you zero in on the chimneys, this is where there's still a lot of wreckage and personal effects, personal objects. I won't show the photos of the personal objects because they're too, if there's any family members on the call, it would be too shocking and too difficult, but there are personal effects still there. And then there's wreckage that's been recovered. This wreckage is in Grand Canyon Special Collection, which is a museum at the South Rim. And they have 2 pieces of wreckage. One was confiscated in '93, and one they purchased. They purchased this landing door. One of the rangers confiscated it from a poacher, and then the propeller was something that they acquired. They purchased it. So we have 2 pieces of wreckage, which is available for viewing upon request. It's really special to see these 2 pieces of wreckage. So I wanted to show off my photography from a flight at 32,000 feet. Somebody asked, how could you fly over the crash site? I've flown this route about 100 times over the years, and I've never had this view of the crash site, never. And I was in a window seat on a commercial United flight. As you'll see in a future chart, we're about 100 times safer today than we were in '56, but you can see the Little Colorado River Gorge. So from left to right, the Little Colorado River Gorge is very visible with the muddy color of the water this time of the year. I've circled the Char Butte, and then I've couple minutes, I'd say about 30 seconds later, we're now looking at the promontory itself where the crash occurred. And then I've zoomed into the crash promontory with the arrow. The arrow is kind of a little bit below where the crash occurred, but it gives you an idea where the chimneys are, where a lot of the debris ended. And may I say that the actual crash site, as you saw in the previous photos, was very close to the top of this bluff, of this mesa. That aircraft almost cleared this butte. It almost cleared the butte. And if you look at the middle photo, there was nothing but straight run river after it. Now, if he had any airworthiness, the pilot at that point, the co-pilot could have tried some sort of a maneuver. The problem is the aircraft didn't have maneuverability. So I'm going to give a bit of a shout out to the Swiss rescuers. They did literally the heavy lifting. And this photo I've obtained from, well, I actually went to Switzerland in early June and went to where the lead rescuer Tony Spinas was living. This shows them taking off in the middle of so the crash occurred on a Saturday. These guys were on a Swiss Air flight to New York and to Arizona by Thursday. So this shows them boarding Swiss Air, and Swiss Air flew DC-6s in those days with a couple of stops before he got to Idlewild in New York. This shows the lead rescuer, Tony Spinas, coming out of a helicopter with all of his gear, and another one of the Swiss rescuers with binoculars around his neck, and either a Rocky Mountain or a U.S. Person here. But you can see the crash site. This should be familiar from what you saw in the previous photos. The crash site with the gentleman, probably Spinas, right there circled in yellow, was looking down on what they were having to confront. By the way, he passed away in 2011. This is a photo of him at age 90 in 2008. This is where these oral history interviews are so critical. We would have really liked to have had an oral history interview with the gentleman. He spoke English fluently, by the way. So these photos come from various Swiss publications, and they show the climbers being lowered down on various lines, bringing up the body parts, the corpses, the debris in body bags. Again, the service, they actually belonged to a group which had a French name and a German name, but it was basically a Swiss rescue service. There are hundreds of rescues in Switzerland every year because of the mountains, because of the Alps, because of the terrain, and because of people climbing or skiing and whatever. And so there's a whole organization in Switzerland. And by the way, the Swiss organization is located next to Zurich Airport. They have a museum, but it didn't have anything about this operation. So that sets the table for us to talk about the 15 technologists. And what's always struck me in going to the cemetery is these names, except for the name of my family member, they were just mysterious. They didn't really mean anything until 2014, when we had the National Historic Landmark dedication, and then we met some of the family members, and you started meeting some of the people, that it really brought it home. So I'm going to go through each one of these individuals. This is a collage of their photos. Some of them are the best available photos from newspapers. Others we've received them from family members. So, in the case of my family, in the case of a fellow businessman, Mr. Lasby, in the case of Jack Roshans, who, thanks to Mike, we have his photo. We have, again, photos that are not the best available, but they're not the best, but they're the best available. And then the aviators are also special individuals. They were very skilled in what they did. So we have some photos here that are both newspaper photos as well as family archive photos. So above on the left, we have the captain, Robert Forbes Shirley. We have Gerald Fiore. This is several years before the accident. And then we have the LA Times July 1st montage of the three of them. Robert W. Harms. Very hard to find photos of Mr. Harms. And then again, Shirley and Fiore. These are the companies of the 15 technologists. These were top companies in the United States in the 50s. Not all were defense contractors. Not all were in high tech or high defense or top secret type of projects. Some are pretty mundane, like Oscar Mayer, or a commercial shearing and stamping company, but others, and steel company, but others were primarily defense. And that was the amazing part, is that of the 15 technologists, 10 were in the defense industry. So the demographics is a good way to break down a population to characterize them. And so I did for the 15, I did a demographic breakdown. First of all, 5 are from Detroit or Cleveland, 4 from Pittsburgh, 2 from Chicago, 2 from Philly, and 2 from Los Angeles. All were of European descent. All technologists were born in the US. 7 were born of immigrant parents, including my father. And then the parent of 1 technologist was born in India to missionaries. This was a young technology group. The average age was 35 and a half, and the median age was 36. They varied in age from 26 to 48. 13 were married, 2 unmarried, and the average number of children were 2. In terms of religion, 10 were Christian and 5 were of the Jewish faith. So this is a picture. This is a very good picture of what professionals look like in the 1950s. They were all men. High degree, I mean, compared to the general population, a large degree of Jewish members of this demographic, and a very young, this is a very young group, because this group some of them served in the Second World War, and some of them were in combat, but most of them did not. Now, among the 3 flight aviators, one was born in California, one born in Nebraska, and then Fiore was born in New York City. They were all of European descent. Fiore was born of Italian immigrant parents. And interesting that Fiore's father and my family's grandfather, my family's relative, my family's patron, were from the same part of Italy, in fact, neighboring towns. So it's a coincidence. I've always told Mike Nelson that his uncle, Jack, my father, and I've also told John Hasha, who's Fiore's nephew, those 3 would have instantly hit it off. They didn't know each other. They came onto that flight by hapchance, never got to meet each other. But I like to say to Hasha, the descendants have become very good friends. So the average age of the aviators was 41. They varied from 36 to 48. 2 were married, 1 unmarried, and the 2 married gentlemen had 1 child each. They were all Christian, 2 Roman Catholic, and 1 was non-denominational. So a little bit more about the employers of these 15 technologists, because this tells you what they were working on, what they were doing. And so there's a little bit of coding here. If it's in pink, it means, or red border, it means that these individuals were not identified in the recovery operation. Remember, there were 29 individuals of the 58 recovered, 29 not identified. Their remains were collected into 4 coffins at the Grand Canyon Cemetery. But their remains are still in those crevices and chimneys you saw in some of those photos. They are part of the Grand Canyon. They're either part of the Grand Canyon in the cemetery next to the Shrine of the Ages, or they're literally part of the chimneys and crevices at Char Butte. So you have Mr. Barrett. He was a retired military individual. He was with a sales engineer with a commercial stamping company, so more of a mechanical type of company. Milton Barry Cohen Carlton was arguably the most senior defense individual on this flight. I have a little more about him. He was a top leader in Magnavox in their defense products group. And I give the reason for travel in each one of these. You can read it, and of course this is available online as a video. Frank Clark was one of 2 individuals from Westinghouse. He was a sales manager for their controls division. He was what would be considered a frequent flyer in the 1950s. So he probably traveled by air at least once a month. My father only traveled by air infrequently, and this was his first and only trip to the West Coast. Leon David Cook was on a consulting trip. He was with he's a corrosion expert. We know the family. We know his son fairly well. He's a member of our group. And so we retained a lot of information about him, including a very good portrait of him. Noel Henry Gottesman was a top mathematician at Bendix. He was their analytical group chief, and he actually headed up their math division, which was working on guided missile mathematics. That was a hot area. It still is today, but it was a hot area in the 50s because the first generation of guided missiles were being deployed. So he was returning home from a business trip, almost certainly to Lockheed, because Bendix and Lockheed had a close relationship, which was interesting because Jack Grossens was returning from the Lockheed offices in Burbank to his home office in Cleveland, and he was on that flight with several Bendix individuals. There were 2 people from Lockheed, 2 people from Bendix. But he was stopping in Chicago to visit family on the occasion of his 33rd birthday, which occurred the week prior to I believe it was the week prior to the accident, because obviously he was 33 at the time of the accident. So he was a high-level official in procurement. And again, we're so fortunate we have members in our group, such as Mike and Barbara, who obviously being family, they have access to portraits, they have access to information about his academic history, his career, etc. Eugene Hoffman was on a special assignment in Pittsburgh. He was based in LA with North American Aviation, very important aerospace company in the 50s and 60s. Their claim to fame is they built the Apollo lander, the lunar lander for the Apollo program. That put them on the map. And then Ray Lasby was visiting Boeing in Seattle, Hughes in Culver City, and the Ream headquarters in government products headquarters in Los Angeles. Theodore Lineman was with Oscar Mayer. Now people would say, well, that's not very high tech, but I gotta tell you, he was with the packaging division, and in the 50s was emerging advances in packaging, which led to food shelf life being much longer. What was interesting, reports said he was returning from an engineering conference, but there was only one engineering conference that week in California, and it was actually in San Francisco, and was an electrical engineering conference. So I'm not sure the reports are that accurate. Carl Gottfried Matlin was another Westinghouse individual. He was a research physicist. He has certain areas of expertise that he wasn't traveling necessarily with the other gentleman, Mr. Clark, on the same mission, but they were both from Westinghouse. And then we had another buyer from Lockheed traveling with Jack Grossens to Chicago. He was based at Burbank with Lockheed in Burbank. His family has asked we don't share any photos. Then we had Russell Shields, who was born a couple of days different than my father, both the same age, both electrical engineers, both senior research engineers. They could be professional twins. He was with Bendix, which was another Bendix Aviation. I mean, these companies are no longer visible or recognizable today, but they've all been acquired or combined with other high-tech organizations. And then Thomas John Sulpizio, my dad, was on the same trip as Lasby. He was visiting Boeing in Seattle, Hughes Aircraft in Culver City, and then Ream Government Products in Downey. And then Stanley Jerome Weiss was a professional and personal visit to the Naval Research Labs at Point Hueneme in Oxnard, California. He had been driven out of that's a Navy lab. He was a civilian expert at the Navy labs, but they drove him out because of his membership in a socialist club in the 30s. So he joined a private non-government entity called the Detroit Arsenal. He was the research manager. And then finally, John Yeager was returned home from West Coast business trip. He was a QC chemist at a steelworks in Wheeling. What is this is from the Lasby archives that they found. It's an absolutely chilling private archive showing the handwritten itinerary of Lasby and Sulpizio, both with Ream Government Products. Notice in his handwriting, he left this with his wife. Notice in his handwriting, United Flight 718, I circled it. 718 is circled. It's so revealing to see something like this because it shows their itinerary. So a little bit more about their expertise. These were really top dogs in their field. This aircraft had a lot of top technologists. Now, one of the great things about technology, the history of technology, is that no technology is dependent on one individual. It's a compartmentalized process. So you had these same company travelers. You had Bendix having two travelers, Gottesman and Shields. They probably were traveling together almost certainly at Lockheed because they were experts at, well, in the case of Gottesman in launch systems, chief mathematician. In the case of Shields, he was a senior research engineer. They had a contract, Bendix, with Lockheed on brakes, on the brakes for aircraft. Grossens and Nims were with Lockheed. They were procurement individuals. Bendix was a major contractor. Matlin and Clark were both with Westinghouse. In the case of Matlin, he was an expert on electronic temperature measurements for aeronautical defense applications. He has patents in radio frequency control. And Clark was a sales manager. So they probably did not travel together. They were probably on separate itineraries. And then Lasby and Sulpizio were definitely traveling together. And they were meeting with these two leading defense contractors, Boeing and Hughes. As you'll see about Hughes, Hughes was in the vanguard of building Falcon launchers in the 50s. These were the first generation of guided missiles, some of them nuclear tipped. That was beyond top secret. Both these individuals had top security clearances. And then Stanley Weiss was a technologist, but he was traveling with the bishops, Rosemary and the child, Stephen Bishop. Rosemary was the wife of John Bishop, who was his former boss. John Bishop was the director of engineering at the Naval Civil Engineering Labs. So while John fortunately was not on the flight, Weiss was on the flight with his wife and child. So they were kind of like traveling partners. They were traveling together, the three of them. And now what are their legacies? Because one of the themes at our conference last November was people making a difference. I did find 4 examples of crash victims leaving a legacy. So Leon David Cook left with the National Association of Corrosion Engineers, left a scholarship or $1,000 grant. Mrs. Cook set that up. It's still an organization today. It's the leading corrosion organization. Barry Carlton has the Barry Carlton Award, which is, until this day, it's the best publication in transactions on aerospace and electronic systems. It was established in 1957. It's a $1,500 award. I think it's still $1,500. It's just an honorarium. Carl Matlin, his wife, made donations of high-value antique objects to the Met in New York. And then Russell Shields left the biggest grant. He left $200,000 in 1959 to his church in Michigan. That's about $2 million today. So clearly the family, besides whatever they got awarded from the crash, they clearly put all of that into philanthropic uses. A little bit more about the biographies of these individuals. And again, the red indicates they're at the Grand Canyon Cemetery. Their remains were not identified. They're in a collective 4 coffins. I'll let you look through this, and both will have this in a proceedings of the symposium, but also this is online. This video will be online. This shows the individuals, who were the survivors in 56, their parents, their wives, or their spouse, in case they're all men, so their wives, their children. And what I've done is with one individual, Barry Carlton, he was by far the highest level defense industry person on board. He had been named general manager of the Defense Products Division of Magnavox. He was the executive director and coordinator of reliability in the Secretary of Defense office for 6 years. So in the DoD, he was a high-level individual. He guided the government's programs for improving performance of military electronics and helped establish a single integrated military electronics program. Carlton also was the technical administrator of radio countermeasures at the Navy Research Labs during World War II. He was certainly a high-level, celebrated defense industry professional. And Magnavox, even with him passing, Magnavox went on to establish leadership in airborne military communications. And it's ironic that the crash occurred because of a failure of communications. One of the themes I picked up is that civilian aviation lagged behind the technology of military aviation by at least 5 or 10 years. And that was a big problem. That was a big problem. All these passengers surely thought of that, knowing that the technology on that flight and in the airways was not as good as what they were developing for the military. So again, pacing through these individuals, we have so many family members we'd like to get into our organization. I only highlight those with bold, the ones that are members. So Ray, and then Lisa, who's the daughter of Noel Guttershman, and then of course Jack Rosen's nephew, Mike Nelson, Gene Hoffman. None of these people have, and then of course the two daughters of Ray Lasby are members, and then Theodore Lyman, his daughter Kathleen, is a member. And then myself. But there are so many, like Yeager had something like, he had 5 or 6, he had 8 children. So, and there's John Yeager's Jr., there's many, many other descendants of these victims whom we'd like to reach out to. And that's one of the themes of one of my conclusions at this talk. Now, the aviators we've been very successful at meeting the aviators' descendants, at least the 3 on the United flight. So we had the pleasure of meeting Robert Forbes Painter, the grandson of Captain Shirley. We've had the pleasure of Linda, the daughter of Robert Harms. And she, her last name is Kirashibasi. She lives in Chicago area, and I know that the Nelsons have been in contact with her. And then, as mentioned, we're very close and friendly with John Hasha, who's the nephew of Gerard. And here's his background. Very interesting background about Robert Harms. He also worked at North American Aviation in Los Angeles as an assembler prior to joining the Army. He was in the Army during the Second World War. Shirley was not commissioned. He worked as a civilian pilot during the Second World War and during Korean War. So he was not in the military. And nor was Fiore. Fiore did defense industry jobs during the war, and then Brewster went out of business and he moved out to California in the mid-40s. All of these gentlemen had extensive experience with the United, but only Shirley had the extensive experience with the DC-7. And that may have played into the problems that occurred with this midair collision, because Shirley had the experience, Harms did not. 230 hours is respectable, but it's not like 1,238 hours. And if there's a crisis or an emergency, and we believe Mike Nelson has deduced that Shirley was most likely not in the cockpit at the time, then you were left with 2 inexperienced people trying to fly this aircraft that was severely damaged. Same way, Fiore only had 285 hours experience with a DC-7. DC-7 is a relatively new aircraft, introduced in the early 50s, and United and American Airlines both used it extensively because it had the longer distance, it had the higher speed. Here's some noteworthy biographical information about these 3 officers, or these 3 individuals. Shirley held the record for the fastest flight from San Francisco to LA in the early 50s with a DC-6. He was an avid golfer and musician. And most importantly, as many of you know from my earlier talk last April, his corpse was found intact, and he was still in an unburned uniform on the ledge above the crash zone. Let's say it was a recognizable uniform. We don't have photos of it. Photos like that are almost unheard of because of the shock and the privacy issues. But the fact that it was above the crash zone and relatively unscathed tells us that he was almost certainly not in the cockpit because both other cockpit members were not identified. He must have been in the cabin. And then upon crash, one of the doors popped open and he was ejected the 8 to 10 feet above. First Officer Robert Harms was the inadvertent member of the crew. And Mike, in his book, does a wonderful job explaining how this happened. He was supposed to be on the earlier flight, which was also a DC-7, but it was swapped out to a DC-6. And that's a slower aircraft. He couldn't fly that because it would exceed the amount of allowable hours for June. It was June 30th. He was already pushing the limits. So the United swapped him at the last minute with another co-pilot. They swapped him from the earlier flight, which would have been slower, but put him on the faster DC-7 flight at subflight 718. So this was the inadvertent member of the crew. And then the flight engineer, Fiore, I call him the aviator's aviator. He was just an extraordinary individual. He was restoring an airplane in his backyard in Torrance. His parents, sorry, missed the letter S. His parents and younger brother Mario lived with him. Mario was the youngest of all the siblings. He was 23 in 1956 and passed away recently in 2020. Again, it screams out for oral history interviews. Fortunately, his nephew, John Hasha, gave an oral history interview on July 1st, 2022. This is from the CAB report. This is a lot of the information about these three individuals comes right from this report. Now, what was going on with these United passengers? Here's something I did take from my earlier presentation in April 2023. The FBI victim identification team was assigned to search for the remains for 6 specific individuals at the United crash site. We don't know which 6 individuals were of interest to the FBI, but most likely some of the 15 technologists. The Swiss recovery team was told to find the Lasby leather briefcase in the wreckage because it contained top secret defense electronics or plans. A group from Rheem took Mr. Lasby's papers from his home office in New Jersey. A law enforcement group searched the Rheem offices of Lasby and Sulpizio in Philadelphia. The FBI forensics report is still classified. I just checked it this morning to see if it had been released. It's still classified. What is so secret after 68 years? Now, we'll shift a little bit in the final moments of this presentation about dramatic improvements in air safety since the 1950s. So in general, the 56 Grand Canyon Midair collision was a catalyst for improvement in air traffic control and aviation safety. So all 228 individuals did not perish in vain, but instead put a spotlight on flight safety deficiencies in a time of greatly increasing air traffic. Aviation safety has improved by over 100x due to changes in the following 3 areas, and it's a multitude of items. 1, administration and regulations. The formation of the FAA on May 28, 1958, put an administrative organization, a formal organization in place. Number 2, engineering and technology. Aircraft equipment, jets versus piston. Advances in radar technology and coverage. Advances in communications. Navigation systems. Air traffic control systems. Advanced collision avoidance systems, which didn't come into place until the late 70s or 80s. Identification and prevention of weather-related accidents, which cause a lot of accidents in the wind shear. I actually witnessed a major accident at DFW with a wind shear related accident. It was in the mid 80s. And not a minor item at all, but crew resource management. Prior to the 80s, the captain was captain of everything. He was the final word on everything. But crew resource management delegated some authority to the rest of the crew and definitely pooled decision-making in crises. So the safety statistics were 10 fatal accidents per 1 million flights in 59 to 0.1 in 2015. So the overall accident rate, fatal and non-fatal, is 0.23 per million flights. So it's 100 to 1 improvement in air aviation safety in terms of fatalities. That's how I could feel safe flying over the crash site at 32,000 feet 2 weeks ago. And this is a chart from Airbus Industries. And I think it's important to just mention in briefly, unfortunately, civil aviation technology lagged behind defense technology. This was the golden age of analog devices and was the dawn of the digital age, but the digital age was starting with the military. Analog computers and devices based on vacuum tubes and advanced servo mechanisms dominated both defense and civilian electronics and aviation. Early generation transistors and first solid-state electronics were only introduced in the mid-50s. Microwave radar technology made advances in the Second World War, but it was not really widely used in the 50s. And then digital computers started to emerge, but only for data storage and computations, not for controls. The Cold War defense budgets led to rapid advances in defense electronics, especially in missile guidance systems, drones, and aviation communications. Think of the space program in the 60s, what that did for technology, what that did for consumer technology, civilian technology. That's what the Cold War did for aviation technology from the late 50s onward. And I'm going to skip these, just a little bit of one of my favorite photos showing my dad in a teaching session, a problem-solving session, showing the importance of an analog computer in almost all of their systems. They need an analog computer to solve equations either while during simulation or even in service to control firing systems for missiles and even gunnery trainer devices. I'm going to skip these just to show, because we don't want to go beyond the 1 hour. So here's ongoing and future activities or research. As we approach the 70th anniversary of the Midair collision in June 2026, it's imperative to reach out to more victim families and organize oral history interviews. The Patrons Group plans a major commemorative event at the South Rim and in Flagstaff for 1 or 2 days. This is a big project for this team. Barbara has written about it in our newsletters, and we are really looking forward to just a tremendous program. Continue to monitor the declassified or released FBI files, or initiate, I haven't done that yet, a Freedom of Information Act request to release the July 56 forensics report. Profile the technologists on the TWA flight. They were 70 of the 70 passengers, completely different demographic on that flight. Also profile the non-technologists on the United flight. Their lives are important too, but it's not as unique a demographic as it was the technologists. And then try to obtain private photos from the technologist families and from the descendants of the Swiss rescuers, especially leader Tony Spinas. I leave you with facts uncovered that are stranger than fiction. And I leave this with you if you are thinking about a novel or a semi-fictional novel. Just look at this list. Co-pilot harms swapped out at the last minute. Captain Shirley's body found intact. Strongly suggests he was not in the cockpit at the time of the collision. Unvetted Swiss rescuers arrived on the scene within 6 days. The U.S. had frosty relations with the Swiss following World War II. The lead rescuer perished in a climbing accident near San Moritz in 2011. He was decapitated in a fall. Millions of dollars of negotiable bonds were in the cargo hold of the United flight. A false identity passenger was on the TWA flight, gaining free passage as a United, posing as a TWA employee. I meant to say TWA flight. FBI and Air Force search for specific individuals and personal effects. Home and office searches. Former naval intelligence and senior DoD technology official on the United flight. There's a lot there. And finally, I want to just say thank you all for attending this evening. Please ask your questions real time in the Zoom chat box. You may email me at that email address, text me at this phone number. Also, check out the patrons of the 1956 Grand Canyon Midair Collision website for tons of information. And this presentation video link on Vimeo will be posted within 2 days. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to, I'm going to turn it back over to
Me,
stop sharing. I'm going to turn it back over to you. I have to stop sharing. There we go. Stop share.
And
And I kept it to 1 hour. Well, I kept it, actually, the intro was about 10. We started at 10 after. It was a 45-minute talk, but it wound up being 40, about 50 minutes.
I have a question for you, Tom.
Yes,
How
sir.
many people are in your patrons group right now?
I'm going to say the number. I'll look for Barbara's body language. I'm going to say it's between 70 and 100. Now we have some people in spirit. We are losing people, and Barbara notes those at the website with an asterisk. They're with us in spirit. So counting those with us in spirit is probably about 100.
I can also tell you, I started working on the river commercially in 1971,
Mm-hmm.
and much of the wreckage was very visible at that time. And I remember pointing it out to passengers and
Right.
talking about it, and the fact that it's so sad that it took an event like that to start thinking of aircraft safety,
Well,
and the formation of the FAA, which was based on that crash.
I mean, I worked for the FAA as an intern for 3 summers in the 70s. This was still a hot topic. This still drove their mission. This accident and several that followed it still drove what their mission was, which is to improve air travel safety. Just Yeah, I had a train of thought that I've lost here about what you were just saying, but I see we have some comments. Do you want to read them, or I'll open?
Most of them are congratulating you, saying an
Okay,
excellent presentation.
thank you.
Wow, that was amazing. Incredible presentation. Wonderful. Thank you. Really no questions there. But again, going back to the fact that unfortunately it sometimes takes accidents. Another instance
Yeah.
was, and I can't remember where, but there was a serious fire in a building that had only the rotating door. I can't think of it. As an
It's the only
exit,
exit. Yeah, the revolving
and
door. Yeah.
it piled up and people couldn't get out.
Yeah.
And so that caused a rule that says you can't have just a revolving door. You have to have doors on either side now.
Correct. And the
So
means must be
again,
unlocked from the inside.
unfortunately, we go through this process of having a disaster before we get common sense. Of course, we
There,
don't always know what common sense is, but
well, there were two huge hotel accidents in the 70s, the MGM Grand in Las Vegas in the 70s with, I'm not sure the death count, but it was in the dozens. And then the Hyatt Regency in Kansas City that the Skyway collapsed, and again, a number of people perished or were injured. And of course, the fire at the MGM Grand led to the modern hotel designs, which include sprinkler systems in all the rooms and in all the hallways. What I just remembered, one of the projects that I mentioned drones a few times. When you see those crevices and those chimneys, these new drones with their GoPro type cameras, could you imagine how we could explore those openings? That's a dream of Mike McComb, who's an FAA and archaeologist, but this would be a major project that the Historical Society, plus our members, plus the Park Service could engage upon, because you need special permissions and permits to do that. Also, how would you control a drone? Where would you be based? You have to hike to the base of the talus slope. You have to be there to control it. It's a massive
Cape
project.
Solitude, which you can get to.
Beg pardon?
You can get to Cape Solitude. It's not easy.
You can
but that would be a good place to control.
The best place to control it would be the 1,500 feet at the base, because Cape Solitude is still about 1.5 miles from the crash site. Well, I hope I gave you some new insights and some new information to chew on, and you can appreciate aviation, and you can appreciate how close we at the Patrons Group feel to this event, and how close we feel to Grand Canyon and to the crash sites and our members. We celebrate our members every day. We want more members from the families to join us. So we'll push this out. Mike will give his very lucid and erudite research talk in about a month. And this is a 1-2 punch. And then Mike McComb maybe will reprise his talk in the first quarter of next year. It's a part of the Grand Canyon Historical Society. We've always sponsored this work. We sponsored the National Historic Landmark. And we want to keep that in the foreground of what we do. So with that, I'll let everyone, at least for those of us here on the West Coast or in Arizona, go have dinner and enjoy the rest of your evening. It wasn't, it was, I know we didn't have a big group tonight because it was a little bit off from what we usually have as our second Tuesday of the month, but we didn't want to interfere with other television programs, things on TV last Tuesday.
Right. And if any of you who are on this are not members, think about becoming a member, please.
And if you are interested if you're beyond curiosity, you're interested in this historic event, and a patron is not necessarily a family member. Many of our members are not family members. They are sincerely interested in the accident, the event. We have retired TWA pilots. We have historians of all different shapes and sizes. So you can easily visit that website, drop a note. Right now it's free. We simply depend upon the generosity of our members to keep our website going. We do want to sponsor some projects, and that's where the partnership with the Grand Canyon Historical Society, because we're an affiliate, that's where it comes in, because we can then turn to the Grand Canyon Historical Society for monies that we may need for some projects.
Well, again, thank you all for attending.
Okay.
And October 15th, Mike Nelson is up next. So we're looking forward to that.
I'm going to stop the recording now, everyone, and it's available